Hello friends, I am Chevee. Welcome to my shed. How are you today? How's life in your world? How's things where you are? I hope everything is good and great and wonderful. Today I want to talk another book review. Another book. I just finished The Lies of Locke Lamora. This has been a book that I've heard about for a long time. I think it came out in the early 2000s. I don't know exactly when, but I remember hearing about it back then from gaming friends, like, oh, you got to read this book, this new series, Lies of Locke Lamora. And I just was like, eh. And there was a period in my life there where I didn't read very much. Reading's only really come back hard into my life within the past, 5 years. Started reading a lot again. At that time, I wasn't reading very much, so I was just like, oh, I'll get to it eventually. And I finally have. It's finally come around. I was looking for something to kind of... The Asian-inspired stories I was reading were not doing it for me, and I wanted something that was fantasy, not necessarily European fantasy, but just, something a little different, and this is what came up on a lot of recommendations, so I went for it. I'm going to try really hard here for a few minutes at least to talk without spoilers, but it's very hard to talk about this book without talking spoilers, and it's because of the type of book it is. So I will tell you, if you want to read the book, I highly caution you against learning anything about it before reading it. And I mean anything. Because I went into the book with a very high concept knowledge, meaning that I understood, or I thought I understood, the main character's motivations. I thought I understood his, the setup of him. And that caused me to have a very different reading experience had I not known anything. So I would say if you're going to read The Lies of Locke Lamora, first of all, read it. It's an excellent, excellent book. I thought it was, the writing was, okay, the writing was honestly, I think my Kindle said I was around 20% when I finally started to kind of become comfortable with the writing. That first 20%, it took me a long time to settle into it. It's not flowery writing, but there is a whole lot of dialogue in this book, and it's all very over-the-top, bastardly, piratey, insulting, just, the people just call each other, horrible names all the time. It's very abrasive that way. And so it took me a fifth of the book to settle into the writing style and to become accustomed to it and to accept it. Up to that point, I kind of struggled through it a little bit. I had to get used to some of the phrases that are used a lot. You have to get used to, just like any fantasy book that's, the first of the series, you have to get used to the gods, you have to get used to the mannerisms, you have to get used to the places. But after I settled into it, it was fascinating because Lynch in this book sets up a world that has amazing visuals. It's a city of canals. It's a city of prestige on one side and poverty on the other. It's full of smells. Lynch writes a lot of smells into the book, sounds. He tells you how horrifically noisy places are and how horrifically things stink, but he also tells you how amazing things are. He writes all the senses in this book, which is something very unusual. He writes a lot about food, he writes a lot about stinks and things, and he really brings you in. And so if you're not accustomed to that style of storytelling, it can be a little bit weird at first, but I think it really helps bring the world alive. That being said, because I had a pretense about the story of this book, I expected something from it that I didn't get. And maybe that was the point. So I say if you want to read the book, go read the book now, turn this video off, because I'm going to do you a big disservice if I continue talking and you continue listening to me. It's an amazing book. Really fun, and I will definitely read the others at some point in the future. Not currently on my list, but they will be. This is it. This is your warning. So I went into this book knowing that the book is about a confidence man. Locke Lamora is a confidence man, and Locke Lamora is setting up a game, a con game. And having recently read Mistborn, which was Brandon Sanderson's heist movie, I came into this expecting something similar, I guess. Not necessarily similar writing or similar story or similar, just meaning that I expected this to play out like a confidence game movie, right? And so the entire time I was reading this, from page 1 till the end, not the end, but from page 1 until, probably 3/4 of the way through, I was fully expecting everything that we were seeing to be under the umbrella of Locke Lamora's knowledge. Like, all of the downfalls were all part of the game. I thought the whole book was a game, and it's not. And that kind of... I was constantly anticipating this, heroic twist in the middle that turns out that all of this, all of the characters, everything that we've seen was all a con, and it's not. And I think that had I not come into the book expecting the con, then I would have enjoyed that first part even more. The book is written in a way that intersperses kind of two different timelines. At the start of the book, we get introduced to Locke Lamora, the child, and then at some point, the book breaks into Locke Lamora, the middle-aged man, who's been a successful thief in the city for a while. But then the child storyline still continues, and we get to learn about the other gentleman bastards that come into his fold, and we get to see them go through their training, and we get to learn the things that they learned. And so it's stitched together in a way that before a character needs to use a part of their former thief training, we get to witness that thief training, and then the next chapter will probably have something to do with what they just did. Or opposite. Sometimes we'll get the chapter first where we get to see the character doing something, and then we go get to see how they learned it. So it's it's a good balance. I think it's a good way of telling that Lynch could have just showed a character doing something, say as a priest or in a fighting style, and then he could have told us, given us some paragraphs about how that character learned the skill in the middle of all that, but it would have ruined the pacing. And the pacing is probably the one thing that I didn't like that much. It's the one thing that kind of felt, the first half of the book doesn't really have that much of a point. And the characters kind of come to that realization around the 40% mark. They realize they have this massive hoard of money, and they're working out this huge con game where they can get 20,000 crowns. They're going to get all of this money, and they have no reason to do it. They don't need money. They have a vault, and all the money goes into this vault, and it just sits there because they don't have anything to spend it on. And they come to the realization that they don't have anything to spend this on. And so I'm telling you, that's literally half of the book. Half of the book, the characters are just stealing because that's what they were taught as children. They don't really have a purpose, and therefore the pacing is a little slow. It's a little okay, we're just going to go through some motions. That being said, Lynch's writing is so fun, and the dialogue is you could flip open any page in this book and find an amazing insult to sling at your friends the next time you see them. So the dialogue was really fun and engaging. So, even though the story didn't have a whole lot, it wasn't moving forward that much, it was still a really fun experience to see these characters, putting on false faces or going out into the world and just being bastards, So it was enjoyable, but I wish the story had moved a little quicker, or the whole story had stayed more flat, had been more of that timeline, and maybe built that into something as opposed to what we got. Because what we got was, that 60% mark when, in a traditional 3-act story, when the hero gets crushed. And in this story, the hero gets really badly crushed. Everything that he holds dear in this world is gone. And not including, I'm not talking about the money. I'm talking about the friends and all of that. So it's it was a devastating blow. But unfortunately, as the reader, it was like I really had only gotten into those characters in the last like couple of chapters, because the first half of the book was kind of just like, okay, we're out doing things. This is fun. But pacing aside, the writing style kept it alive for me, regardless, and I, kept turning pages. The last probably 30% of the book I flew through. I checked it out. I had it checked out, I should say, for I guess 9 days. So I read it in 9 days, and I would say that the last 30% of the book I've read in the last 2 days. No, right? And the first 70% of the book was 7 days. Yeah. So it took a while to get through it. But the last part of the book, just breezed through it. And when I say 2 days, I mean that it's now, I think it's 2 p.m. when I'm recording this, and I've read for maybe a couple of hours today. And so I flew through the last 30% of the book. It's amazing. The whole ending of the book is phenomenal. So, and that being said, I also went into the book expecting this whole big con to be unveiled, and it's not. It's a much more seat of the pants con every time we see Locke engaged. It's just he's figuring shit out as he goes, and once I got the grasp of that, it really made the whole thing click, and it really made the ending that much more fun. Like he has just lost everything. And he had no more will to go on, no more reason to go on except for revenge. And I got to see that play out in a very Locke way, in a very, he's not a fighter, he's not a good guy, but he's also got heart, and he also is a priest, and he has his faith to depend, or not depend on, but to lean on and to trust in. And so he goes up against some enemies that obviously could have gotten the best of him, and he lucked his way out of all of that. And I think that's the point. I think the point is, it's all a big lie, right? All of the lies of Locke Lamora, this is what they amounted to in the end. The sinking of the treasure, right? Very, very good book, especially the atmosphere. I really loved the atmosphere. I really did enjoy the kind of mob tie-in, having loved The Sopranos. I got a lot of that feeling out of this with the Kappas and the Paisans and the paying up and all that sort of stuff. I really enjoyed that aspect of it. I really enjoyed that the gentlemen bastards were two-faced. They were the richest thieves. They were nobility rich. But they pretended to be paupers and pretended to be just these guys running this scam out of a temple. I loved that dynamic. I loved the idea that the yellowcoats in the city were allowed to be there because of the secret peace. And there was a whole lot of the world building that was amazing because it felt very, very real. I also loved that this is fantasy. You could argue this is traditional Eastern European, or not Eastern. This is traditional European fantasy because it feels very Italian, but it's also fantasy it took fantasy out of the medieval period. Like instead of just being people living in castles, it's the city, and the city has modern conveniences. Yes, they still had piss buckets and they dumped them out the window into the canals, but they also have hearthstones. They can cook without fire, just spread some water on the oil stones. They had lights, alchemical globes. They had a whole lot of modern conveniences thanks to magic. And so it wasn't this like depressed medieval European economy. It was a like full-fledged modern city with, modern technology that was based on magic. And I enjoyed that very much. It felt more gas lamp than traditional European fantasy. So I think it's an excellent read. I think that if you're into fantasy at all, or even if you're just into kind of more of a thriller, it's almost a thriller. It's a guy trying to figure out his way out of a lot of situations, and he comes with some very clever ways to do it. Check out The Lies of Locke Lamora. Next on my reading list is The Stand. I'm finally going to read it. I've never read it. I'm finally going to sit down and do it. So it's probably going to be like a month before we talk about books again, because that's going to take me a while. Thank you for being here as always. Thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing, being amazing friends and wonderful people. I really appreciate you. And I will see you again Monday. Today's word you should know to sound smart is couture. It is a noun meaning clothing in the latest and most popular styles created by in vogue fashion designers. If Alyssa does not have the latest couture prior to its debut on Paris runways, she will not deign to consider wearing it. Couture. C-O-U-T-U-R-E.